I'm Rami Khouri, Director of the Essam Faris Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs. Welcome to everybody. Thank you for coming. I want to make one quick announcement before we start, that we have another exciting event tomorrow, which is part of our series called The Ambassador in the Academy, in which we bring an ambassador on campus for half a day. In return for us giving them a nice meal, they give a public talk and meet with students and faculty and have a nice exchange of views. Tomorrow we have Her Excellency Audlise Norheim, the Ambassador of Norway to Lebanon, and she will be giving a talk at 4 p.m. tomorrow in Bathish Auditorium here on the issue of facilitating peace processes. Can small countries like Norway play a role? And the particular focus of her talk is because Norway is one of the countries in the West that continues to have open channels to all the players in the Middle East, including Hamas and Hezbollah and others. They talked to the ANC in South Africa. She was in South Africa, and part of the dialogue with the African National Congress, when many in the West were shunning the ANC as terrorists, Norway continues to follow that policy today, to talk to everybody, and they have a lot of interesting lessons that I think many of us can learn from, and others around the world. So that will be tomorrow at 4 p.m., the Norwegian ambassador. Today I'm very pleased to have as our speaker Karen AbuZayd, the Commissioner General of UNRWA, United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees. And this is a particularly important lecture and event for us because it actually launches formally the first of 3 of our programs that we are now finally inaugurating at the Essam Faris Institute after a year of studying how we can best fulfill our mandate of harnessing the research and analysis of AUB and other scholars and bringing that into contact with public policymakers, meaning governments, private sector, international donors, foreign countries, multinationals, civil society. And we now are launching several programs, and Karen AbuZayd will inaugurate our public policy, our program on public policy and governance challenges of Palestinian refugee camps in the Arab world. This is a program looking at all the refugee camps throughout the Arab world, Syria, Jordan, Palestine, and Lebanon, and looking at the challenges of public policy, land ownership, working rights, security, labor, education, public health, urban planning. And this is a program that we're very proud to jointly manage with the Center for Behavioral Research at AUB, headed by Samir Khalaf. Is Samir here? No, not yet. And the academic coordinator of this program is Professor Sari Hanafi, who is with us here today, and we're very pleased to inaugurate this as the first of our programs and jointly managed with the Center for Behavioral Research. Karen AbuZayd will talk on the issue of 60 years later, challenges of Palestinian refugee camps within their Arab host communities. Karen AbuZayd has had a long and distinguished career. She's now the she's Commissioner General of the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees. She previously served in several positions in the UN, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees organization for 19 years, and she has had a long career in humanitarian work through the UN and other agencies, especially in Uganda, Chad, Ethiopia, Namibia, Liberia, and also based in Sarajevo and Geneva at different times. She has always struck me as one of the most honest and dedicated and courageous public servants in the international civil service. And what she has been saying recently about the condition of Palestinian refugees is, first of all, absolutely within her mandate as Commissioner General of UNRWA, but I think a great affirmation of true humanism and courage. And we are absolutely delighted and honored to have her here, and she will speak for about 30 minutes or so, and then we'll have an open discussion. So, Karen AbuZayd, the floor is yours. Thank you for coming.
Well, thank you, Rami, for these very kind words. And friends, colleagues, students of the American University of Beirut, the Essam Faris Institute and Center for Behavioral Research, I really thank you for inviting me to this inaugural event for your research project on public policy and governance challenges of Palestinian refugee camps in the Arab world. I commend you for taking this initiative to address a topic that demands attention in this part of the world. With the everyday pressures of delivering services to refugees, we at UNRWA tend to have little time to give to these important questions that lie beneath the surface of our daily tasks. However, we fully recognize the value of research and intellectual inquiry, and as our resources don't allow us to do much of this ourselves, we grasp every chance to support and encourage and share the results of this kind of work. So I really appreciate this is an unusual opportunity for me to speak to a different, interesting and important subject that I have not directly addressed in any of my public statements so far. I've just undertaken one of my regular visits to UNRWA camps over the last few days. I live in Gaza, but I visit the camps periodically, not every day. And I visited Khan Yunis and Rafah camps on Saturday. Yesterday I was in Jordan and visited our camps in Zarqa and Talbiya. And in anticipation of giving this lecture, I reflected a bit on the breadth and the complexity of the issues about refugee camps in general and about Palestine refugee camps in particular. Rami's mentioned a whole list of issues that concern us, and concern us especially when we're thinking not just about our budget, but when we're thinking about the future. And when there might be a peace settlement one day, and what happens to the refugee camps then, and how do we answer? We've come up against the wall of a lot of legal issues that will be very difficult for us to answer, and that's what we hope this kind of program will help us address. The spectrum of human interest matters that are raised in any city or town apply equally to Palestine refugee camps. Like any human habitation, refugee camps evolve. Their borders and features change in tune with the growth of the residents and developments around them. Since only 1/3 of the registered Palestine refugee population lives in camps, we tend not to always differentiate our own planning and services, except in the infrastructure sector, between those inside and outside the camps. And that's another reason to welcome this project's focus. In addition to spatial and demographic questions, there's a cluster of issues pertaining to the socioeconomic and political environment of the surrounding host country or authority. As the profile of refugee camps is influenced by the countries and the communities in which they're established, each UNRWA field, Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, West Bank, and Gaza, exhibits its own peculiar features. Among such features are the security and governance structures that affect each camp. There's also a specific cluster of issues that cuts across fields and host countries. Examples of these include poverty, unemployment, poor living conditions stemming from the 40 to 60-year history of the refugee presence, from the wider economic climate, and from the extent to which refugees have access to economic opportunity. And then I'll add another set of issues that are unique to Palestine refugees. That is, that the refugee camps draw an essential part of their nature from the character of the Palestinians residing in them, namely their capabilities, their assets and aspirations, and also from their prospects as a people. While these interlinked issues were on my mind during my visits to the camps, what struck me most powerfully was that the 60 years later, in the title of my remark, should more aptly be rephrased to read 60 years too late. For the population of over 4.4 million Palestine refugees that UNRWA serves, and equally for the many millions of Palestinians dispersed across the globe, 60 years in exile is an anniversary that they would have wished not to be commemorating. The years have been unkind to the Palestinian people, by whichever measure you employ, humanitarian, human development, human rights, or socioeconomic. The past 60 years can hardly yield a favorable verdict on the Palestinian condition. Although many Palestinians and Palestine refugees have achieved success in many walks of life, these accomplishments are primarily individual. For Palestinians as a people, the fruits of these years are bitter. Armed conflict, repeated displacements, inter-Palestinian divisions, social upheaval, and material hardship. Palestinians have also had to contend with political processes which are at one and the same time hectic and static, with grand promises often matched only by the deep disappointment they leave in their wake, and the frustration and the anger and the hopelessness that are coming more and more into play these days. And yet 60 years after what Palestinians refer to as the Nakba, the catastrophe, and in spite of the harsh occupation in West Bank and Gaza, and many years of miserable conditions across the Middle East, Palestinians will be with us until a just solution is found to their situation. And this has to be a solution that will satisfy their aspirations, not as individuals, but as a people. As long as they remain a dominant presence in the Middle East, the issues with which they are associated, notably their quest to live free from occupation and their desire to realize self-determination and other fundamental human rights, will continue to touch the conscience of the international community. And until their status is resolved within the framework of a just and lasting international settlement, the practical questions posed by their human development needs will remain the concern of UNRWA and other agencies. These are questions that stimulate intellectual inquiry and motivate our efforts to alleviate the severity of the circumstances in Palestinian refugees' lives and to lend them a hand in their struggle to maintain their human dignity. I applaud the project, again, being launched this evening, and warmly congratulate those who have conceived it and brought it into being. From a humanitarian perspective, I recognize the value of this project as part of the broad, ongoing enterprise, which my agency and I are engaged, of seeking the protection and care of Palestine refugees during their long period of exile. In addition to the intellectual and research assets this project will generate, it has the advantage of a dual role. Given the roots in this country and in this city, the American University is able to bring the insights of a community perspective as well as the rigorous independence of a non-governmental entity. This is a potent combination which will serve to clarify and help craft creative solutions for the myriad practical issues that will be tackled among those that Rami listed when he introduced me. This evening's topic will touch upon some of these issues that fall within the purview of the new project. I believe that the challenge of refugee camps, Palestine refugee camps within host communities, is defined by two different but mutually reinforcing currents, namely the dynamics which preserve Palestine refugees as a distinct group and the extent to which the international law and best global practice can be reflected in the management of refugee camps in this region. I recognize that there are many other dimensions of the challenge presented to host communities. I trust, however, that the vantage point of these two aspects may help to shed light on important public policy questions, at least they do for UNRWA, as well as to suggest areas for further investigation by researchers and practitioners. I'll touch briefly on a few well-known reasons why the relationship between refugee camps and host communities tends to be sensitive. Then I'll look at the ways in which international law and the global refugee experience relate to some of the issues raised by the management of refugee camps in the region. In exploring this, I'll draw on the global refugee experience to illustrate the parallels. Allow me to begin with some remarks on the issue of Palestine refugees as a distinct group within their host communities. The dynamics of the relationship between refugees and host communities are determined by a variety of historical, cultural, ethnic, and temporal factors. Generally speaking, cohesiveness and harmony tend to be promoted when there is affinity of language, culture, and religion between the refugee population and the host community, and also where, as in the case in this region, the host community identifies with and supports the aspirations of the refugees. The duration of exile is also an important variable. Assimilation usually becomes more likely as the period of exile lengthens. But the Palestinian refugees experience doesn't fit this mold. In Lebanon and elsewhere in the Middle East, it's rather the forces inducing distinctiveness that seem to hold the most sway. Refugee camps are differentiated from other habitation zones because their residents define themselves by reference to the experience of forcible dispossession from their homeland. In the Palestinian case, this separateness of refugees, and by extension the locations where they live, is cemented by several factors. The conflicts of 1948 and 67, were uniquely devastating because in addition to the human grief you'll find in all the refugee situations that Palestinians experienced from violently losing their homes, their property, their livelihoods, they were also deprived of the state in relation to which their international personality is defined. In the absence of a Palestinian state, The quest to create one is itself a foundation for Palestinian solidarity. For this reason, Palestinian refugee camps serve as much or more than places in which to reside. They function as symbolic representations of the Palestinian struggle for statehood and as manifestations of the refusal to allow the privations of the refugee condition to distract them from aspirations of return. These powerful sentiments on the Palestinian side are given a different connotation from the perspective of host communities. The absence of a Palestinian state means that there's no concrete basis upon which host communities can realistically expect the plight of refugees to be resolved in the immediate or foreseeable future. That's pretty obvious after 60 years. This is a source of tension where Palestine refugees are perceived as chronic, long-stayers competing for scarce local and national resources. The stakes are considerably higher when issues of demography come into play on the national plane of host countries, not least those whose realities already include strong factional interests and fragile political consensus. According to one study, the Palestinian population, which stood at some 1.3 million in 1948, is now well over 9 million across the globe. Where the Palestinian population grows at a rate faster than that of the communities which host them, lingering questions of competition are aggravated by delicate issues of demographic balance, proportion, and in some instances, political representation. Over the last few minutes, I've suggested some reasons behind the tendency for Palestinians to retain their distinctiveness in exile. It would be fair to say that in some instances, this tendency has contributed to a measure of isolation and a related inclination toward differential treatment by some host communities. The issues raised in these instances ultimately engage the responsibility of states and other authorities, and therefore fall within the purview of international law and practice. The international context is relevant, first because refugees are entitled to a range of protections under international law. This entitlement is triggered when the protection of the refugee's country of origin is lost at the time of their flight. The entitlement is grounded in the imperative to preserve fundamental freedoms and human dignity and draws its force from the peremptory character of norms requiring states and other entities to protect and promote that dignity. The upshot of these precepts is that Palestine refugees, wherever they reside, whether in camps or outside camps, should be treated in conformity with human rights law, international humanitarian law, and international law in general. States bear the primary responsibility to ensure that refugees residing within their jurisdiction are treated in a manner consistent with international law. From this flows the duty of host countries and authorities to ensure the safety and security of refugee camps and to promote the rule of law within and around them. The role of humanitarian agencies, critical as it may be, is to support and complement that of the state. The significance of international law is reinforced by the relevance of the global experience in the management of camps. Refugee camps are as old as the phenomenon of mass population movements across frontiers. Over the decades, they've been the trigger and the testing ground for the practical application of principles of asylum, human rights, and the protection of civilians in armed conflict, all of which are now cornerstones of the modern framework for international protection of refugees. The issues exercising countries and authorities hosting Palestine refugees in our region are similar, if not identical, to those which other refugee hosting countries have confronted for decades and continue to grapple with. Take as one example the issue of security inside refugee camps and its connection with the security of the country. During the proxy wars that blighted South America in the late 1970s and 80s, Salvadorians, Nicaraguans, Guatemalans, who found refuge in camps and settlements in the subregion, were to a greater or lesser extent identified with the armed struggle to liberate their respective countries. This posed a number of thorny challenges to host countries and humanitarian agencies. Of particular importance was the problem of compliance with the well-established principle that places of refuge must be entirely humanitarian and non-belligerent in character. how could host countries and refugee agencies ensure that the camps were free of armed elements whose presence violated humanitarian principles and also served to attract cross-border attacks from opponents in neighboring countries? No less dramatic dilemmas were presented in the Southern African context during the wars of liberation from colonialism in the 1980s. This was a heady period. The struggles for independence from apartheid, colonialism, and minority rule attracted virtually unanimous international support for refugees from South Africa, Namibia, Mozambique, and Zimbabwe. This support was often translated into unquestioned backing for the leaders and members of the liberation movements who maintained a dominant presence in refugee camps. Among these were the African National Congress, the ANC, which led the fight against apartheid in South Africa, and their Namibian counterparts, the Southwest Africa People's Organization, SWAPO, whom Rami mentioned already as having been terrorists at one time in many international perspectives. It is interesting to recall that these essentially militant political organizations often assisted humanitarian agencies to manage refugee camps and humanitarian services within them, even if some of their activities may not have been entirely compatible with the humanitarian character of refugee camps. The experience with refugees from Rwanda, Congo, and Burundi in the Great Lakes region of Africa in the mid-1990s took these issues to an even higher level of gravity, one that many NGOs pulled out from even helping these refugees. The sheer size of the refugee population, coupled with the intensity of the conflict and the degree of militancy, meant that to the present time, refugee camps exert a destabilizing influence across that entire region. There are many others, Pakistan, Iran, and so on. We won't go into all of those. I've suggested that Palestine refugees share a strong common identity built around their narrative of persecution and survival in exile. I've also spoken of how international law and the global refugee experience are relevant to the issues raised by Palestine refugee camps in the Near East. In the global refugee experience, relevant to the situation in Lebanon and the Middle East, is this global refugee experience relevant to the situation in Lebanon and the Middle East? This is indeed a question worthy of debate and further inquiry, and one which I leave you, as researchers and experts, to pursue. If, however, past experience is a reliable guide, I'd expect the answer to revolve around the unique character of the Palestine refugee condition and the special circumstances of each host country and authority in this region. Before concluding, I'll make a few brief mention of the Palestine refugee condition in Lebanon. In many respects, the Palestinian experience in Lebanon exemplifies the bitter fruits I referred to earlier. Deep, unremitting poverty and grim living conditions are the reality for the majority of refugees, including many of the 53% who live outside camps in Lebanon. The refugee camps themselves occupy the same land as they did in 1948, although the registered population has quadrupled. The material hardships faced by Palestine refugees are compounded and in some cases caused by labor market and other restrictions. In the summer of 2005, the government announced the easing of many of these restrictions, but to very minimum concrete effect so far. In these circumstances, UNRWA services are a vital lifeline for the Palestine refugees. Through health care, education, and support to the poor, we strive to address the needs of those who are most vulnerable, even though we struggle with shortfalls in contributions to our general fund. We remain gravely concerned that conditions in the camps reduce the impact of our primary health care services, and the lack of employment potential discourages young people from pursuing an education, with children dropping out well before the end of their basic education, a phenomenon we don't see in the other fields. UNRWA and the Palestine refugees we serve are fortunate to have in Prime Minister Signora and his government a partner devoted to improving the situation and prospects of refugees. Excuse me. We are gratified for the active support the Lebanese government continues to give to our countrywide camp improvement initiative, and for its initiative to provide identity documentation to Palestinians who are without such. And we look forward to partnership with the government and other entities in the reconstruction and recovery efforts in Narrow Beirut. Sorry. As some of you may know, we presented the preliminary plan, master plan for reconstruction of UNRWA this morning at a press conference with the Prime Minister. This is a very positive development, I think, here. But in current conditions, there can be no human security, human dignity, or human development for the overwhelming majority of Palestine refugees. Conditions such as these remind us that while questions of international law, state responsibility, and the management of refugee camps are significant, our most pressing priority in Lebanon should be to ensure decent living conditions and sustainable livelihoods for Palestine refugees living in and out of camps. I hope I've provided some food for thought on issues that require much more reflection and clarity, including by myself and by UNRWA, but issues which, from a humanitarian and human development point of view, might motivate your research and policy development work. For us in UNRWA, there's no higher accomplishment than making a positive difference in the lives of Palestine refugees, and I'm confident that your project will contribute to this same goal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen. Some of you are standing up in the back. There's some seats for $5 in the front here if you'd like to come up. You get a discount, so you don't need to stand up. You have to give a donation to UNRWA. No, it's actually they're free. Yeah. Yeah. I just want to make a couple of words. First, to thank Karen for a typically powerful, honest, comprehensive, and I think morally and legally and politically compelling challenge to consider these issues in their integrated way, whether we're looking at law, human rights, human dignity, security, and just basic human decency. I think we need to look at these issues in an integrated way. And I just want to mention quickly before we open the floor discussion that this project, this program that we're launching at AUB now, with the Center for Behavioral Research and the Sam Fares Institute, aims at, first of all, bringing together researchers throughout the Middle East who are working on camp issues. There are many people in the region, outside, international organizations, academics, all over the place working on camp-related issues. We have at AUB about probably 8 or 10 professors we've identified, and there's probably others that are still hiding. We'll find them. But we want to bring together the best research that's available and to bring it together in the best possible context of honest, compassionate analysis that is oriented to policymaking. And this will include fostering new research by AUB and many other people, working with partner organizations, UNRWA, civil society, Palestinian groups in the camps, the Lebanese Government committee to work on labor issues and to work on camp improvement issues, foreign donors, the many foreign countries, governments, international organizations. We want to be a meeting place, a coordinating center, a place where all of the people involved can meet in an open, honest, neutral, and intellectually rigorous and candid but accurate atmosphere. And this is what AUB, I think, has always stood for. And we want to try to take that process into an area like the Palestinian camps and their host communities, which is extremely sensitive, but it's also extremely important, as we've seen in the last year, what's been going on in some of the camps here and other places. So this is part of what we're doing, and this is the inaugural lecture in the series, which will follow very soon. Now you'll see an announcement next week probably. We will have lectures by His Excellency Khalil Makawi, who's the ambassador who is coordinating the Lebanese Palestinian committee on this issue. He's agreed to give a talk. Sari Hanafi, our academic research director, will give a lecture soon. Richard Cook, the director of UNRWA. Fatih Al-Azam, who's in charge of human rights for the United Nations Regional Human Rights Commission here, will give a talk, and we will bring distinguished speakers from Palestine, Jordan, Syria, and other relevant organizations. So this will be an ongoing process for some time, with combining research with analysis with public discussion of this nature. So thank you again to Karen for launching this, and I open the floor to comments and particularly questions. Way in the back. Where's the mic? Yeah, wait for the mic, because we're taping this, and the audio will go on the website. So if you want to say hello to your mother or your sister, leave that for another occasion. Just get right to the question.
Maybe she's looking at the website.
Yeah, that's right.
So my question is...
Could you identify yourself?
Yeah, my name is Faisal Bibi. I'm a graduate student. My question is, you mentioned that refugees have a right to international human rights laws, just like anyone else, and that they also have right ethically to livelihoods and living conditions. And so my question is basically, does the law in Lebanon, never mind the practice, but the law in Lebanon, which restricts Palestinians from working certain jobs, development of living conditions in the camps, and Palestinians from owning their homes in this country, and at certain points in time, restrictions on transport and travel, which I think is another basic human right. Do these, in law, so does the current Lebanese law and policy violate international human standards?
You have to answer each one. Okay. Well, from my point of view, yes. As I mentioned, though, we have been working with the Lebanese government since Prime Minister Senora took office to change those laws, and at least to change the rhetoric around those laws, where refugees have been told that they can work in more than the 73 occupations that were formerly forbidden to them. As I said, we haven't seen a lot of change in practice for people being able to get jobs, but we've certainly seen a difference in our being able to help out in the refugee camps, because before that we weren't allowed to even take basic materials in to improve things, even paint or nails or so on. So now we had a $50 million camp improvement initiative that I also mentioned, which is pretty well funded and is going on now. So we're working on, and the government has been very supportive in helping us raise the funds for that and going out to donors and having meetings with donors with us and so on. So I think that things are changing. I mean, governments are entitled, of course, to make their own laws and to have reasons for making those laws. We deal with this every day, of course, in the occupied Palestinian territory, which we talk about all of the time about the violations of human rights and so on, but it doesn't mean that that we can change them easily. Do we take them to which courts and to which, and then what sanctions do those courts have? You know, the International Court of Justice has pronounced against the wall, the barrier, the separation barrier in the West Bank, but that hasn't stopped it growing. So I would say that the conditions of the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon is on a better track now than it has been for the whole time of their exile here.
The lady in the middle, and then over there, and then.
Hiba Khudur, assistant professor in the PSPA department. You mentioned the state of the role of the state in ensuring that the refugee are treated in accordance to international law, and then you also mentioned how the humanitarian organization usually complement that role. How did your organization specifically contribute to the public policy associated with the refugee camps in Lebanon? Could you provide specific examples regarding, for example, employment permission or permit, I guess, identification cards that would be issued to the refugee in Lebanon? Thank you.
Okay. How do we contribute to public policy as humanitarian organizations is mainly by information, pressure, and so on. Being humanitarian, and when I say we are a humanitarian complement to the state, I mean that often what it is that the humanitarian action is sort of a substitute for the state, and is often put out in front when the state or the international community, more likely, isn't able or won't do anything politically. Because when there are political problems, the humanitarian, human development agencies can only do advocacy for what they think is correct, but they can't really change things. There are political parts of the UN that do take some initiative like that, but as I answered to the previous question, it's often difficult to get the sanctions and to get the action that follows even international law rules that are made or recommendations or pronouncements and so on. So I think that, I'd like to think that, and I especially think that there was a change that took place when our new director, Richard Cook, came to Lebanon. He was much more active, was not shy any longer about following, okay, this is the Lebanese way, we have to accept this, there are historical reasons for this, whatever. And Richard, I think, was kind of a nag on the government with this. And I think it came in, there was an environment of some others that were backing him up, and then people came into the government. It wasn't just Prime Minister Senor, there were other ministers even before that who'd taken a position to let's him improve the conditions for Palestinian refugees. So that's what we do.
Ambassador Khoury, in the middle.
Relative? Is he a relative?
Thank you. My name is Samir Al-Khoury. I'm chairman of a committee, an informal committee, which is housed at UNRWA, which deals with Palestinian employment and tries to overcome the hurdles that we all know exist in Lebanon. Well, the fact is Palestinians do work in Lebanon, and it's not a well-known fact, but they are not very often or most often employed in a legal way, which means that Palestinians who work in Lebanon are underpaid, very often exploited in the work they do, and they do not take up the positions they deserve. If they are engineers, they're not registered as engineers. Indeed, they're not registered at all. So they get paid less, and if they're severed from their employment, they do not get any indemnity, they don't get proper vacation, etc. So I want to insist that there is a misconception about employment of Palestinians in Lebanon. They are not employed formally, but they do work, and they are very much in the workplace, in the Lebanese workplace. So what we're trying to do in our committee is to try to impact on the official circles to try and change the laws. There has been an attempt, a memorandum which was issued by the Minister of Work 2 years ago, but which opened up all kinds of employment, administrative employment for Palestinians, but it had no impact in actual fact, because the conditions which the Palestinians were subjected to get a work permit and so on were so difficult that in actual fact Palestinians preferred to go on working without work permits. And so this memorandum had no effect, plus the fact that the memorandum itself could be revoked by a new minister when he comes into office, so which makes the Palestinians rather wary about applying for it. So our committee is trying to impact on officialdom to try and change those things. So I would like to just insist that it's not a situation where the Palestinians do not work. They do work, but they don't get what they should get in terms of pay and conditions. Thank you.
Do they work in professional capacities? We know they do manual work and labor, and
but they're not registered as professionals. They do work and probably do excellent work as engineers, but they don't get the pay that an engineer deserves. Thank you.
I think we're going to ask Ambassador Khoury one day to come and join our lecture series for an in-depth analysis of the evolution of labor issues for the Palestinians, and maybe bring another person from another Arab country to compare, because one of the things we want to do is to show how the conditions in the camps in every area are different, but there are also some things to learn from each other.
Okay, I'll be happy to.
Thank you. Let's bring it up here to the front, and then front row to 3 in a row here. Sari, Fateh, and Ellen. And this is the most difficult thing for moderators picking questions, so we just kind of go back and forth, and I try to get as many as I can. Keep the questions short, that way we get more people in.
Okay. Thank you very much for your lecture, and I'm really interested in your criticism to the way the humanitarian action is depoliticized in somehow, and the tension between what is political and what is a humanitarian. And I think you were really one of the rare officers speak out publicly and in an official meeting about this, the problem of this depoliticization of the humanitarian action. And I feel that your criticism is addressed toward the international community. But let me be devil advocate.
You always are, sorry.
Yeah, so this is my, I am paid for that. Yeah, okay. So I would say that UNRWA also, in somehow, in this dilemma of what is political and what is a humanitarian. I mean, just one example about the mode of governance of the camps. I mean, I wish UNRWA can be more active in the mode of governance. I mean, often my interviews in West Bank and here, and always we hear, no, we are just a service provider and we don't interfere in. I think when you have a situation like in Lebanon, for instance, where popular committees are not at all organized, I think I wish, and I know very well the situation in the ground, that UNRWA can do a lot of things in mode of governance, and I hope this can be done.
I hope not. We do have to try to keep some lines between ourselves and others. The more, and I'm not the only one to speak out about this. This is something that everyone in UNHCR would talk about too. Is the humanitarian fig leaf and so on. That we're there when the political actors are not doing what they should do, or they're postponing or whatever, still negotiating. And that's what we must leave those political things to the politicians. The political actors, so that we can continue our humanitarian work. Because if we step over the line too far, we will be prevented from doing our work. We have to be careful now. When I speak out and people think it's frank, it's because I can do it because I'm living in Gaza and because I talk about what I actually see. What I say are facts on the ground. You draw your conclusions from them. Because I wasn't criticizing this division. You said I was. I'm not. I'm saying this is the fact, that we are the humanitarian actors. We will describe the humanitarian situation. We will address the humanitarian situation. Now, of course, that's a little bit disingenuous because what is humanitarian? And this is a major problem that we have, especially in the OPT now, and especially since Hamas won its election. And from the beginning, it was the Israelis who called all the UN agencies together to say, what is humanitarian? How far can we define this? How much can we help you get humanitarian goods in? They didn't listen to us, as you can tell now, because they're defining humanitarian goods are only bits of food and bits of medicine, and certainly not enough for people to live decently. So there is, of course, an overlap, and we stray into each other's territories. And the other thing I would say to what you said, though, is about you raised the popular committees, is a lot of this we should leave to the Palestinians themselves. And that's what we do, and we do that deliberately and correctly, I believe, because the Palestinians don't need us to organize their popular committees or to tell them how to govern themselves. Maybe we should in some places, but or should give advice, perhaps. But Palestinians are the best educated people around. They're totally competent. I have 28,000 Palestinians Palestinian staff who can do the jobs that the 100 international staff we have in UNRWA could do. So I think it's better to leave it to those who are defined as the political actors, either by themselves or by others, and not try to give that role to us.
Thank you. I'm Fatah Azam with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. And if I may add to this particular discussion, the idea that in fact it's human rights that's the interface between the humanitarian and the political in large part. And it's the interface because it is a matter of standards and norms that have been agreed upon internationally, and it is a matter of obligation. Now, the problem is that there are several misunderstandings. The first misunderstanding on human rights is, and I was gratified that, Karen, you referred to this several times, is that somehow globally, and states in the region in particular, believe that their commitments under human rights treaties and conventions that they have signed and ratified extends only to their citizens. And that's wrong. That's a misconception. If you read the international treaties on human rights, they're referring to every person, everyone in the jurisdiction of the state. It extends to everybody. Now, human rights also, it's another misconception, define minimum standards. They don't define the ceiling, they define the bottom. You see, you cannot go below that. There are people have a right to an adequate standard of living. Adequate can be defined differently, but it has to be adequate for human dignity and human life. The obligation cuts across. The door of the humanitarian, the role of the humanitarians comes in to say, I am willing to put together resources, international support, etc., to help provide that. But it is your obligation, whether it's a state or even the Palestinian leadership itself, not to get in the way of that, to support the effort towards that and move it forward, not to put restrictions on that. This is the key. And in that sense, just to add one bit of information, our office, with the High Commissioner for Human Rights in this region, have launched a new program this year, which we are entitling The Human Rights of Non-Citizens, just to drive that point home. And for our purposes, non-citizens would include certainly all refugees, Palestinian and non-Palestinian refugees, stateless persons of all sorts throughout the region, as well as migrant labor and migrant workers, and in particular migrant domestic workers who are having a difficult time throughout the region. So this idea of bringing human rights home as the interface between need and obligation is crucial. Thank you.
If I can just add before Karen answers, one of the phenomena that we've noticed around the region, and I know this from my years in Jordan and also in Palestine and here, is that the camps in many cases become magnets for stateless people. Some of them are just, refugees, and they're just in awful shape. They have nowhere to go. They go there. Sometimes just very poor people find refuge in camps. Sometimes criminals find refugees in camps. So these are some of the dimensions of the camps that we want to address. It's not only the Palestinians who are there, but the camps in their host communities as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question to answer there, but just to reinforce some of what Fatah said, and to say that not only do we try to put the political actors in front of their responsibilities, we often also draw a line between ourselves as the humanitarian and the human rights groups, and ICRC, which works much more quietly, but on the issues that we don't go out so clearly to. But what we try to do as we work together, as Fatah suggested, is to provide the information that we have from the thousands of us who are on the ground, so that they can make the cases on the human rights issues.
Okay. My name is Ellen Khouri, and I'm a democracy and human rights trainer. Am I right in believing that that the Palestinians have fallen into a kind of legal crack? That no international organization is actually legally advocating their case? I mean, the High Commission for Refugees does have a legal arm, but the Palestinians do not fall under their jurisdiction because UNRWA exists. At the same time, UNRWA, comprehensive as it is, and helpful as it is, does not have a legal arm. Therefore, the Palestinians are in this legal no man's land. And I feel that this has been reflected on the international scene. Am I right? And if so, how can we solve that problem? Because there is no international organization advocating their case, whether in local countries or on the international scene. Thank you.
Well, what I always say to this is that having spent 19 years in UNHCR before I joined UNRWA 7.5 years ago, is that I think that UNRWA does very much the same thing that UNHCR does in terms of protection of the refugees, because that's what we're talking about here, the protection. And protection for me always, because I'm not one of the legal people from UNHCR, we have some UNHCR people here, they might want to say something. We have presence equals protection, and providing services equals protection. And we're talking about this a lot, and the whole protection of civilians and so on. But I think, and we, UNRWA and UNHCR have their annual meetings and agree that we're doing the same thing for, we for the Palestinians in the region, they for Palestinians outside the region, because we have no jurisdiction outside, and they take care of any protection needs of Palestinians who ask for them. And then there's the further thing, again, about the Palestinians themselves. They do have their own international advocates. They have their own ambassadors everywhere. They have their presence at the United Nations, which is a very strong one, a very vocal one, and that's especially since the mid-90s at least. So I don't agree that they don't have international advocates. I don't agree that they don't have those who work for them. That, you know, talking about legal arm, we have a legal arm. We have a legal department that does look into, you know, individual legal claims as the UNHCR's. But generally, when we're talking about protection of Palestinians, I think the role is taken by a number of different organizations, but especially by UNRWA.
Let's go back to this side of the room over here. The lady, and then back there. And then we'll come back.
My name is Leila Zakharia. I'm from Welfare Association. And I want to thank you, first of all, for giving really a very...
Just explain to people who might not know what welfare organization is.
Okay, Welfare Association, we're a donor, international donor agency formed by the Palestinian diaspora. And we work in the Palestinian camps. We have been since the mid-1980s, if not earlier. I want to add something, and I'm sure you will add more after I say. I think the question of NGOs. I think in this mapping that we talked about today, the role of NGOs, the relationship between the community, UNRWA, and NGOs. The Palestinian community has its own NGOs. Some of them registered NGOs, some of them ad hoc groups who work within the camps. And in the last few years, I think the relationship between UNRWA and NGOs in this country has really improved tremendously. There has been a lot of coordination, many joint projects, and also a lot of coordination on advocacy. I want to enter specifically on the question of advocacy. Because local NGOs who are part of that of the community are also have their own advocacy dynamics. Palestinians are not passive actors; they have their own. They do their own work, and so one of the examples I can give where there are possibilities in terms of advocacy, and one should work more and more on them. I'll give the example of the shadow reports that NGOs present to various humanitarian organizations. Particularly in the case of Lebanon, several NGO shadow reports were presented by the NGOs along with Lebanese NGOs on the situation of the Palestinian child. And the UN Commission on the Rights of the Child has given recommendations to the Lebanese government to eliminate things like discrimination in laws, to take care of disabled children, Palestinian and Lebanese disabled children. So there are these things that people can do together. And it's not as hopeless as it sounds. There are ways to raise issues, specific issues, so that slowly and gradually we can enter into the legal system here, try to change it, convince Lebanese that these laws should be changed, and work on it in order to improve the situation. I don't see it as bleak as it sounds.
In the back.
Hi, my name is Rima Rasi, and I'm writing my master's thesis on transitional justice, in particular the possibility of reconciliation between Palestinians and Lebanese, and whether certain kinds of reconciliation are applicable or not. And basically, through writing my thesis proposal, I studied a lot about the perceptions that Lebanese hold towards Palestinians and vice versa. And it is greatly held that that Lebanese do not actually favor Palestinians, because they blame the civil war, they blame everything on the Palestinians. And I mean, these initiatives, you know, for improving the camps, they're great, but I mean, when we come to talk about what the view Lebanese hold towards the Palestinians, I don't think this is actually going to help in changing this view that Lebanese have, that Palestinians are a marginalized entity that actually cause terrorism, that are a source of Islamic radicalism, and so on. So I was wondering, I mean, from your point of view, what are any constructive ways that could actually help in changing the views Lebanese people hold of Palestinians?
Yeah, I go back to the person who spoke before, Leila, who said, you know, the NGOs, for example, are working on these issues. And I would also say that I think these things are changing, too, partly because I think the Palestinians were very careful about their behavior during the summer before last, the war, where they gave refuge to Lebanese in their camps of people who needed it, stayed very carefully away from that war. I think also even what happened in Beirut, if people are clear about it, it was the people in the camp who were objected first to this group who had come in, and they knew who they were or who they weren't, and didn't want them there, knew there would be trouble. I think that this is another thing we have to work on gradually, and that Beirut and reconstructing it is going to be a major event, and proof that Lebanese can accept that the Palestinians will have a camp reconstructed for them. You know, we hear that there are objections and problems with that, but there are tensions, but that they are being worked on. So it isn't something that's going to happen overnight. I don't have a lot of specific recommendations on that, but all of the kinds of things that we're doing, that this program that we're launching tonight is doing, will contribute to helping people understand one another.
Thank you very much. Arafat Jamal, working with UN High Commissioner for Refugees, and I find that when I announce that I'm working with UNHCR here in the Middle East, unlike in a lot of other countries in the world, I always have to explain myself and say that no, we're the UN Refugee Agency, but we're not the one that deals with Palestinian refugees. That's UNRWA. And then secondly, I also find that in trying to explain what we do deal with, I explain that there is a very large Iraqi refugee population. And so I'm particularly glad to have been here for your speech, Karen, because I think I would like to sort of raise this whole issue about the question of how the UN deals with different refugee populations, in particular yourself having worn the two different hats, of course. For the Iraqi population, and I'm interested to see what you think about the comparison and the contrast between the current Iraqi refugee population and the protracted Palestinian population. I think probably one of the reasons why the up to 2 million Iraqis in the region are somewhat invisible are precisely because they're not in camps, unlike the Palestinians. They are a mostly urban population. They're a population that also has been treated, I think, differently by both the host governments and the host people, which is not to say that and also by the United Nations, in the sense that if I look at the way that UNHCR approaches the Iraqis, we're doing programs that are intended to, in a sense, assimilate the services. We're not setting up parallel systems, but rather we're making grants to national ministries, health, education, etc., in order that Iraqis may access the same facilities as the local populations. We're also doing a large-scale resettlement program for the Iraqis as well. So, but at the same time, there's, although they may be somewhat invisible because of their not being in camps, there's also the fact that they are not assimilated, the fact that that their resources are dwindling. Often popular perceptions of the Iraqis are negative amongst the host populations, and there's this lingering fear that Iraqis may be bringing something in with them, whether it be sectarian tensions, whether it be possible insurgents, etc. But I'd be interested from your perspective whether you see, one, how in your tours of the camps, etc., how the Palestinians are actually perceiving this new influx of refugees into the region, and two, whether you think there are any lessons that there might be from the experience of dealing with Palestinians vis-a-vis dealing with Iraqis.
Yeah, this isn't something I hear any of the Palestinian refugees in camps talk about, and I will remind everyone again that only 1/3 of the Palestinian refugees live in camps, so the other ones, I don't know, maybe they're invisible too, the other Palestinian refugees.
They are a problem when they are visible. It's a problem.
Yeah. So, and there's, I don't think there are too many parallels right now. I haven't thought about them really, but, the Iraqis, many of them want to be invisible. They don't want to. They certainly don't want to be called refugees. They don't call themselves refugees. And we've been having we had some debates with some UNHCR colleagues on that, is why we should insist that someone be a refugee if they don't want to be a refugee. And if they want to be called guests, well, they can be guests as long as they have the money to pay for things. I also was about to say, and there's some people here who will speak to this too, I think, and they have their hands up, so I know they might, about the Palestinians from Iraq who are on the borders of Jordan. No longer. They've all gone, thanks to some of these people who are here, and the ones that are in Syria. And I think a lot of people raise this with me from all over because of the dreadful conditions they're in, and people are aware of that, and they're aware of the problems of the Palestinians left behind in Iraq. Now, the Palestinians haven't started talking about the Iraqi refugees, as far as I know, but the government of Jordan has begun to talk to us about the Iraqi refugees, and this is going to be a problem. Most of the Palestinians in Jordan are citizens. The school population in UNRWA schools in Jordan is declining because the Jordanian schools provide English from the first grade. They have computers in every classroom. They have a single shift in the direct proportion to UNRWA's double-shifted schools. Ours are 93%. Theirs are 7%. So people are voting with their feet. They're citizens. They can go to Jordanian schools. They can go to Jordanian clinics, and they're beginning to do that. The government has come to us to say now, we have been persuaded by UNHCR to offer services to the Iraqi refugees. They can come to our schools. That means that we're not going to accept Palestinians into our schools any longer. This will create a problem for us if they affect that. It's just now an alert. But this is the kind of thing that will begin to happen, I think, as the Iraqis become long stayers in Jordan and Syria, and as they become increasingly destitute. No, they can't. They can't. That's what. Yeah, no, that's right. But there are people who are accepted. The Gaza refugees, Jerash camp. These who are using their services now. They've recently agreed to that. Recently allowed them into some of the schools, but now.
Back there.
Yeah.
And then,
yes. This is the lady who got the Iraqis off the border.
Hello, my name is Perlaisa. I actually was not going to talk about the Palestinians of Iraq. I had another question. I'm a Palestinian refugee from Lebanon, and I wanted to know why I would not be able to register my children with UNRWA unless I marry a Palestinian man who is registered with UNRWA, considering that UNRWA is a UN agency, and I do believe the UN considers a woman to be equal to a man.
I think they consider them better than men. I don't know. Anyway, no. Yes, she's exposing one of our shameful parts of fitting in with the local cultures. Actually, what it is, and that is that the children of a refugee woman married to a non-refugee is assumed to be the child of that non-refugee male, and that is the person that's going to take care of them. We tried to change this a couple of years ago before we got into the 21st century, I think, and this didn't work. There were big outcries from all of the host countries, except the Palestinian Authority, who supported us on this. Then we tried to change it gradually, so at least we offer services to all these people, which we did in any case, especially to the women if they became either widowed or divorced, which then was a problem if the children were still with them, and then who did look after them and where were they registered. So we're now at a point where we're still working on this with our host governments. And we are registering more and more of them. We have made at least some publicity about this to let people know they could register their children with us. We've come into a bit of a problem, though, because we found, especially as the Intifada went on in West Bank and Gaza, and especially in West Bank, that there are so many who've come forward because so many new needy people. Is that we aren't able to accommodate all of them, either in our schools or even with our health services and so on. So it's right now it's also a problem of funding, not just a political problem, but it is something that is high on our agenda to keep working on, yes.
Over here in the middle, the brown shirt, fellow in the brown shirt. Yeah.
Joe Halou, Senior Economics. I really find it very tough and almost unfeasible and impossible to decouple the political factors affecting the existence of the refugee issue in the first place from the effort. Because I really consider that the United Nations involves a bundle of contradictions. The UN and the international community as a whole does not, or I mean practically does not, refuse settlement building in Israel. It does not force Israel to pay reparations for any acts, for any criminal acts it commits. It does not force it to pay compensation to those that have lost their lands. And yet, it placates the refugees by telling them, okay, fine, you know what? Well, we're giving you schools, we're giving you medicine, food, shelter. Give a person a fish for a day, you feed them. Give a person a fish, you feed them for a day. Give them the proper tools to fish, then you feed them for a lifetime. It applies over here. Give people their land, or at least penalize those that have not accepted to return the land, and thus you've began the first step on state building. I'm not saying that UNRWA is not committing itself to proper humanitarian action. No, on the contrary, you are. But what I'm saying is that I don't see how this is going to properly be resolved by extracting it from its political environment. And if I'm wrong, please correct me. Thank you. Thank you.
I think you're right. And that's why we're encouraging the political actors to act. I just want to say, because I sometimes hear this from donors, you teach a refugee to fish. Most Palestinians know how to fish. The Palestinians, if they have the freedom, they will take care of themselves. You look what's happened in Gaza. It's completely collapsed. 80% of people are on humanitarian aid. There are no imports or exports. 3,000 businesses have gone out of business since June alone. The private sector has collapsed. And that's all political. And we're sitting there giving more and more food to more and more people. So, yeah, there are all sorts of contradictions there. And the first one you have to do is lift the occupation. And lots of people are saying that. And lots of people are talking against the settlements and against. And even the Americans are begging the Israelis to stop expanding the settlements and to cut down the roadblocks and so on. But nothing happens, huh? So what do we do? You know, where do we get the force that's going to help some of these things happen? So maybe there will be an international force in our region that will witness some of these things and maybe get some of them changed. I don't know.
If I may ask a question, do you have any concerns based on what you know around the region that the phenomenon we witnessed in Nahr al-Barid with the Fath al-Islam and groups of that nature might be reproduced in other camps? Are there any other similarities or signs of this kind of process taking place?
According to my colleagues, no, that there are people going to make very sure this doesn't reproduce itself. One can't be sure. And if you'd ask me about maybe in other places besides Lebanon, I maybe at this moment be even less sure. Because the message we've been giving for the past couple of years is that if you isolate and sanction people and treat them the way you're treating people in the OPT, including in West Bank, we mustn't forget that. We focus on Gaza without seeing what's happening in West Bank, that you radicalize them, you make them more extreme. If you don't even, perhaps you don't make more people extreme, but you make the people who are in power from a certain side, you make them more extreme. We've seen this very clearly since June, that the moderates, the people in Hamas who were willing to compromise, who were talking about Israel, talked about a two-state solution, we don't hear them. That's who's invisible now. But who's running the street in Gaza are the people from the military wings, and that's getting worse. And it welcomes it. You know, this objective is, besides it being illegal and against international law and so on, it's also not meeting the objective of getting rid of Hamas and changing people's minds and so on. Israel, America are to be blamed, and the people are, some of them, few individuals here and there associating with the most radical groups that are out there around the world and coming into Gaza now.
Here? We'll have one or two more, and then we'll stop at 6:30.
Hi, my name is Abdurrahman Zaza. I'm an engineer and an activist. There are over 300 families from Nahr al-Barid still residing in an UNRWA school in Badawi camp. So do you know when they will be moved to a more humanitarian environment? And secondly, what will or is the UNRWA role in the reconstruction process of Nahr al-Barid? Thank you.
Richard.
Here,
there are now less than 300, but that doesn't really...
Richard, identify yourself.
Oh, sorry, Richard Cook from UNRWA. There are now less than 300. That doesn't really help very much because there are 260 odd, I think. We are presently building prefabricated housing, which, to start with, is a better quality than the traditional houses that we've built in the past. And we plan to have those, we've already completed 225 of them, and we hope to get people out within the next, I would suggest, 2 or 3 weeks from those. The conditions they're living in are very poor, but also, of course, it does somewhat, it affects quite considerably our education program, although we have got all the children back into school. The role of UNRWA in the construction process, we are concentrating on the camp itself, and we will see the whole project through to an end result. We're in the process, as some of you may know, of developing a master plan. We presented that this morning to the press. That will be developed over the next few weeks, and we will then go into a detailed design phase. We'll present also to the donors, along with the World Bank and the government of Lebanon, and we will construct it. People say, will it ever happen? Yes, it will. If, you know, that is UNRWA's commitment to it, and it's the government's commitment, and we're in the process of doing it. We're on the way.
That's it. Thank you very much. Karen AbuZayd, thank you for inaugurating this program. Thank you all for coming.